And so that's really where Paul had to come from too, is it's okay to be single, but you need to understand there's some rules to the singleness. But there's also some blessings in it. So I want to teach you a little bit about what Paul said. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul talks to the married people. He also talks to the single people. So he's actually giving two different kinds of sermons here. He's basically talking about relationships. For a long time in the church, we only have taught marriage because we always thought kids had to get married, they have to have babies, you have to have you gotta have your name pass on. That was such a big deal. So I shared one time with somebody about it's okay for my kids to be single. I've told them that. Be holy, but be single. It's okay. If that's what God chooses for you, or if you're single even for a season, it's okay. Whatever. I'm not pushing my kids to get married. And I had a minister tell me, he goes, wow. He goes, because most women, they just want grandbabies. I said, okay, but if I push my girls, because this is the dilemma that I saw in the church. We push our girls to get their identity in a boyfriend. Then we get mad at them when they sleep around. Do you see the problem? We have a problem. We're not sending clear signals to our kids. We teach them, no, it's really important. You have to have a boyfriend so we know you're okay and everything's right. And then they get a boyfriend, they start getting sexually active. And they're like, oh, but we didn't intend for you to get pregnant. Really? The message is twisted. Instead of teaching our kids purity and waiting for God, if he does bring them a person into their life, it's God brought this person into my life. And they're still to keep their purity until they're married. And then they have the babies. We've done it all backwards because we've accepted what the world teaches. Yep. And that's the problem in the church. So this is what Paul says in verse 6 in this chapter. But I'm saying this more as a matter of permission and concession, not as a command or regulation. I wish that all men were like myself. Now, when he's talking about this, he's not just saying this for the men, but even for the young ladies. He's saying, I wish you were all like me and you chose singleness and you could handle it, because I'm going to talk about that in a minute. He's not saying that this is what God is saying, that you should choose singleness, okay? Remember God said in the garden, it's not good for Adam to be alone, so he gave him his helpmate. God understands that there is a necessity in us to not be alone. But sometimes the calling on someone's life is so high, marriage becomes something that actually pulls them away from the calling. That does happen. And that's what happened with Paul. Now, scholars say that it's one time because he was part of the Sanhedrin that he probably was married and his wife probably died, but he chose to never remarry. So he remained single. But in that singleness, then Paul was able to travel and do what he needed to do. He was able to do what God called him to do. I mean, can you imagine him trying to do that and have a wife? It would have been very, very difficult. So again, there was a purpose for it. So he said, I wish that all men would remain like myself in this matter of self-control. But each has his own special gift from God, and one of this kind and one of another. But to the unmarried people and to the widows. So he's not just talking about the singles that have always been single or young people that are single waiting for possible marriage. He's talking about widows who have now with no spouse and are not getting remarried. That's, my mom and I have had this conversation that there's men when they get older often want to marry a woman younger than them because they want someone to take care of them. And so there's this age where you quit really wanting to get married again. And I've seen it. 3 of the women that were older, including my mother-in-law and 2 of her friends, got married pretty close together, and they all remarried after they had been single for almost 20 years and got remarried in their later years. And most of them were not very happy with it. It didn't turn out the way they wanted it to be. When you have the love of your youth and you've had babies with them, and then it just wasn't, it was companionship, but it wasn't the relationship that they wanted. And so it didn't always fulfill. They almost like their singleness better. They kind of missed those days. So again, singleness can be a blessing. And I say that because we didn't teach it in the church. We really haven't. You know, the first minister I heard say that was Steve Furtick. Talked about it's okay to be single, and everybody went. It was weird. It was like not something you ever talked about. Yet Paul addressed this. And yet Jesus was single. John the Baptist was single. There was a lot of men of God who stayed single to fulfill the call of God on their life. And yet we were always taught as women that our identity was in our husband and our children. But then you look back, you never see that Mary Magdalene gets married. Never. She served in the church. But you never see her get married again. Mary never married again. Somewhere they found the call of God on their life and they fulfilled it, and marriage was not their identity. So here's Paul talking about